The Las Vegas Grand Prix, was it worth it? Did Max learn all of his overtaking spots on the Formula One game? Welcome to Tinfoil Helmets, your occasional spicy hot take roundup of all the latest F1 rumors, all with the almost believable conspiracy theories to back them up. Everything here has been carefully researched for hours to make sure it is totally founded in logic, reason, and truth. Or not, who knows. So, I guess we're going to start off with, have we got anything right about our predictions?
Indeed. We should lead in with the first one, which I'm going to say we get a full point for. And then the second one, which I think we also get a full point for, which is, it is an utter failure. I will say that the Las Vegas Grand Prix was an utter failure up until the race.
Yeah, the race was... Is there, like, especially given everything that went on with Free Practice 1 and 2, everything that went on with Free Practice 3 and qualifying, everything that went on with the fans and stuff and all the comments, and, you know, it all seemed like we were shaping up for just a real crap race even with that. And then the race was really good.
It was good, which I called just to take the opposite position last week, but it turns out that was I was lucky.
I ever since, you know, probably about halfway through the race last night, I started thinking about this question because I know we predicted this was going to be a bad failure of a race or bad failure of a weekend, and I was spending that the last half of the race and even through to Sunday morning when we were recording and thinking all right, did we get that one right? And I have to think we did get it right, because all the way up to the checkered or the red lights going out, it was just not going well. One of the parade cars, and I know we're going to talk about it, dropped oil on Max's grid spot. No, there was, the only redeeming thing from this weekend was the race, which, hey, if there's going to be one redeeming feature of the weekend, I'm happy it was the race.
The question is, though, was it in spite of the track or because of the track? And I think that's the biggest question. Was it saved ultimately by the fact that there was a lot that happened that had nothing to do with the track and had everything to do with the drivers and the teams? Or was the track naturally, did it encourage this thing? In which case you can declare that the track is a good track. But I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. I think we need to see more.
Come back next year to find out.
Exactly. So that we're going to give ourselves 2 points for that.
I thought the Alphas did do bad. The Alpha Towers. I thought they didn't do great.
No, they did. That's that. The first point was the 2 points. It was not a failure, and it was going to be an amazing race, which I think we called. So we get 2 points for that.
Oh yeah. And then the Alphas, not too bad. No, they were crap. They were
terrible.
They were
exactly
terrible. Not good. All right. Between race drama, there wasn't much going on this time around.
No, it was surprisingly quiet.
However, GM say they're going to come in and do the engines in 2028 with the Andretti Motorsports team.
I was actually surprised by this. This feels like a significant investment from GM. The only thing I took as the conspiracy theory is GM know that Andretti is not going to be allowed in, and so this is great free PR. They can just get a bunch of coverage. We can talk about how it's good for the sport. GM's committed to building F1. People will see the news, but then Andretti won't get let in, and they don't need to build any engines.
No, I think it's the opposite. This is one thing of that the FIA was saying of to really sweeten the deal, it would be great if you brought in another engine manufacturer as well. So I think this is one of those things of, I think this actually ups the quality of their bid rather than lowers it.
You said that, and now I've got another conspiracy theory, because we are a conspiracy theory podcast.
Right.
Because Andretti was supposed to be coming in with the Alpine engines, correct?
Which they will.
But here's the thing. Between the money that's been put into Alpine from not the car company, I wonder if there's actually underlying this the fact that GM knows that Renault is going to bow out, and either GM intends to take over the engine division of Alpine, or they have, it's too... This is part of the deal to make sure that F1 doesn't collapse, and GM's like, sure, okay, I'll take a sweet deal.
Yeah, and somehow Ryan Reynolds is all involved in this, I'm sure.
Indeed. I'm pretty sure he is.
I did see Rob McElhenney
at
the GP. And just as a side note, let's check Wrexham in the standings. Because I know they played yesterday. I don't think they won. They're down to 4th in the standings in League Two.
League Two. I thought they were in League One, but I don't know what's going on in British football anymore. It's too confusing.
Yeah. Well, they're still looking good, like they might go up. So we'll see. Yeah. However, I am very happy about GM coming in. I, however, think we need to change the engine rules for 2026 to do total displacement rather than mandate a V8, V6 engine, because we need an American V8 in Formula One.
Yes, yes. This is the opportunity for a revitalization of a crate-based F1 any team can go, like the Ford Cosworth was in the 80s. This is the answer. This is the only answer.
And this would be even better because what Audi is going to be coming in, and they made an amazing V4 with their Le Mans car. So if you just go like total displacement of the engine, you're going to have an American V8, which is probably going to be, and you're going to have an Audi V4, which is going to be amazing.
Does this not align with also the comment we've said before that it should be horsepower capped, and how you get there is your own problem?
I think so too. Whoever's in Ross Braun, contact us. We'll let you in on everything. And also, I think it's time to do an LS swap on an F1 car with GM coming in.
Down
Absolutely.
for it. Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Does somebody still have a job?
That's a great question. Do we think the Vegas mayor has a job? I think the Vegas mayor himself is okay.
Herself?
I have no idea what the mayor actually is. That's a great question. While my co-host searches out to make sure that we get the correct identity for the Vegas mayor, I will say
Carolyn Goodman?
Oh, it's a lady. I don't think she has anything.
Yes, you should really re-examine your personal biases on this podcast.
Very true. Very true. I apologize for that, and I will now take that into account in my future verbalizations. The question is, though, what did the Vegas mayor do that was anything wrong? She seems to be fine.
I think the comment was she made a comment earlier in the leading up to the Grand Prix with all the stuff that was going on of like, was this actually worth it for our city? And it wasn't going to be anything that we were going to know until probably even a couple of months from now.
I see. I'm still not sure it was worth it for the city. There is a lot of disruption and a lot of insanity. And I think she's safe. I think that's fine. Unless the F1 promoter is actually part of the mafia, and we're going to end up with some old school.
They're not doing any refunds. We'll get to that. Sergio Perez. I think we're just going to have to talk more about this later.
Yeah, let's talk about more that later. That's a great question.
So I was bored on Thursday night, and I had nothing else to do. And I thought, for the good of the podcast, I will turn on the Netflix Cup.
Before you get into this, I have a question, though.
Yes.
Are you a normal golf observer and therefore are able to adjudicate on the quality of the golfing that was brought forth in this excellent live special?
To be fair, I don't think the golfing was the problem.
Okay.
But no, I generally do not watch golf. I have somehow ended up on the golf side of TikTok, which I don't know how.
I have a lot of questions, but let's move past that.
Yeah, me too, algorithm. That being said, I do know how to play golf. I have played rounds of golf before, so I am familiar with the game. But I will say, as two people who met at a streaming service company, I was pretty appalled with the live product.
Oh.
Because it was a live product when they originally aired it, and man, was it clunky.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The direction was clunky?
The direction was clunky. There were an odd amount of celebrities there, and Bert Kreischer, comedian, was kind of one of the host commentators, and suddenly a wild Mark Wahlberg appeared with his daughter, and his daughter did not want to be on camera, but it's oh, let's go talk to Mark Wahlberg. And yeah, it was an unorganized round of golf, which, to be fair, I thought Lando was going to win because we all know how much Lando loves golf and playing golf and seems to be all about golf. Carlos Sainz actually won, and then, in true Lando fashion, broke the trophy.
I think this is a misconception, because I swear I've heard that Lando has said that Carlos is the better golfer.
Oh, okay.
Did you see the Alex Albon whoopsie?
I did. I am disappointed he was not playing with his girlfriend.
Now, speaking about misogynism,
yeah,
I wonder if that was probably part of it.
Yeah, maybe. Because I think in the scramble format they were playing, on the size holes they were playing, I think she could have done just fine. And then we would have had a great another story out of the Netflix Cup rather than whatever the hell that was.
Yeah. On a slight tangent, as we switch into tech podcast mode just for a brief moment, I wonder if this is a great example of how the fact that when Apple went into TV, they did basically Dragon's Den, but for apps, and it was abysmal television. It was truly, utterly, absolutely god-awful. But then they've pulled it out the hat and they made a great set of shows. I wonder if this is just Netflix who's like, we don't really care about the content, we'll just use this as an excuse. And this is just a practice run, and they're going to come back stronger and better than ever.
I would much rather go back to wondering if something is cake or not.
Okay, I'd agree with that.
Have you watched Is It Cake?
I've watched about 3 minutes of it.
Oh, so good. Anyway, and then we got to Free Practice 1 and 2.
Wow. Are we really going to let it continue to be called Free Practice 1?
Well,
because I'm unsure if it was really worthy of that label.
Well, if for the fans, it was definitely $200 Practice 1.
Indeed.
It wasn't free. Yeah. So what, Science Car pretty much pulled a manhole cover out of the ground.
That was so bad. I was watching it live just because I'm like, oh, it's at 8:30 and I really want to see how this track really looks. And I just was watching the car because they had it live as he went over it. And everybody was like, what was that? And everybody's like, I don't know. And then his car's like, you got a limp home, and everybody's like, oh, look, it's a Ferrari causing a red flag. What a shocker. And then it turns out it was one of the most abysmal situations we've had in F1 for a long time.
$1.5 million in damage, I think, is what the speculation was.
Yep.
That's going to hurt the car. It's new chassis, new engine, new battery.
Yep. And probably some chiropractic appointments, because apparently he couldn't feel his legs for 30 seconds.
And apparently he could see through the bottom of the car.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about that, because I'm like, there's not a lot of space for you to look down.
Yeah. Carlos might have some questions about that too. So we had about 8 minutes of running in Free Practice 1, and then they decided, well, we're going to shut down. We need to red flag it. We need to go inspect all the manhole covers. It was also worth noting that it wasn't the manhole cover itself. It like ripped itself out of the concrete. It was an even more failure than like, oh, it's not welded down properly.
Yeah. That was the shocking part. Is it's one thing when it rips the thing off, and it's bad when that happens. But you're like, oops, my weld failed, and you need to hire a better welder. But this was like, no, fundamental structural failure.
Yeah.
Did you hear how they addressed it?
No.
Once they addressed them. So everybody thought they were pouring concrete down them. So apparently what they did is they poured sand down them and then tarmacked, what do you call it? Yeah, tarmacked over the top of it. Asphalt, that's what you call it in America. They put the asphalt over the top. And I was very curious about this because I was surprised that would hold more, like in a stronger, more reliable way than a piece of concrete that's in the whole thing. I was fascinated by that. I need a civil engineer to come explain this on the show for me.
I'm more curious about like the repercussions of how do you undo that once the race is over.
A giant vacuum. As I have recently learned, having got a recent issue of Trenchless Monthly, which is a magazine that talks about digging holes without digging a trench.
And it's a monthly? It's not quarterly or anything?
I believe so. It's from a thing called Trade Journal Collective, $15 a quarter, and they send you literally a random trade journal every quarter. It's amazing. I love it. I had one whole about coffins once. That was brilliant. Anyway.
All right, well, that concludes the neurodivergent tangent of this podcast.
The second one so far. But the thing that was interesting is I think they just go along with the giant vacuum cleaner and they just shove a giant vacuum cleaner down the hole, suck all the sand out, and then fix the top of it.
All right, there we go. This portion of the podcast brought to you by Dyson, not affiliated with us in any way unless they want to be. Anyway, and so then they went around and they inspected all the manhole covers, and which obviously they had to push back Free Practice 2 to, I want to say 2 a.m.?
Yes, 2:30 technically.
2:30. George apparently took like 4 naps somewhere in all this and has no idea what time it is, like going into qualifying.
He has a bed in his room in the trailer.
Apparently. Awesome. Well, it turns out that the people who are running the event had only paid the workers were only wanting to pay the workers till 1:30, so they kicked everybody out of the stands. There was a really good rant on the Formula One subreddit from a Las Vegas resident who was like, we've been looking forward to this. This was like the only ticket we could sensibly afford, and looking at the ticket prices, I don't blame them. So they got 8 minutes of running, and then a really terrible non-apology from the CEO of Formula One.
It was so bad. And it was like you can slice and dice this in so many different ways, but the fact that there was no empathy in it is almost like the most galling part.
I appreciate. I think I saw Martin Brundle on Twitter called out like, you can include the word sorry, like
yes.
But it's just there is now a class action lawsuit against the Las Vegas Grand Prix.
Really?
Yeah.
I am excited about that.
Yeah, because there is the legalese at the bottom of like you can't sue us, but like
That's never stopped a lawyer.
that's quasi unenforceable anyway. And I think they have a good case of like, hey, you did not hold up your end of the bargain by any stretch of the imagination, and a $200 gift shop voucher is not great.
There's a certain irony also in that, given that it was for free practice, and I'm pretty sure they did not sell the $15,000 tickets, that they could just refund everybody, and while it might be mildly expensive, it would probably just resolve the issue and be done with it. But they chose not to, and it's just a mess. It's a total train wreck.
I agree. And I think that leads us on to a great new segment just for this week I want to call The Many Opinions of Max Verstappen.
I am excited to hear about what opinions Max has.
Because, well, he had all of them this weekend, and I was here for it. So start with the driver presentations. The quote is, "For me, you can skip this. We are just standing up there looking like a clown." Did you watch any of the driver presentations?
I watched like a few clips of it, and it looked ridiculous.
My wife sent me a Formula One like TikTok somewhere, and it was related to one of the crashes or incidents or something like that going into the weekend, and it made a reference to like a Hunger Games thing, and she didn't understand. And I'm like, oh no, you need to watch the F1 you need to watch the driver presentation. So you go, oh my gosh, this is Hunger Games. It's like, yeah, we know, like, yeah.
I understand what they're trying to go for, and I understand there's a certain pomp and circumstance, but I feel like they didn't get it right. But my problem is I'm biased. I come from a different culture, and I'm not into the pomp and circumstance of this type. I mean, I'm not really into the pomp and circumstance. But I feel like that's what I don't understand, and I feel if you like that sort of thing, it was amazing. But I just don't feel that's the majority of the people who watch F1. I also think it's a waste of time for everybody as well. Like, it's ridiculous. The Miami one was on the bubble. The Miami one, like, I get it. It made sense. It didn't. But this was just, like, so much.
I did like the Miami one because, for me, granted, I did grow up in America. I am an American. I always do like kind of the big sports finals introductions. Like when I was growing up, the 90s Bulls were a big thing. And, you'd turn off the lights in the stadium and it's like you'd run through the whole starting lineup. And it's always very cool. You go to a live sporting event, but we're Seattle based. The Sounders come to mind. I remember one time I went to one of their matches, and the public address announcer will say the first name of the player, and then everybody in the stadium says the last name of the player. So there's a lot of, I think, really cool pageantry around lineup introductions. I think they're good, they're fun. I like the idea. I agree the execution of this was a bit iffy.
Yeah, it went to 12 and really needed to stop at 11.
Yeah. I did like when they walked up to the paddock for the first time and they had all the Welcome to Vegas signs and all the Elvis impersonators and the Blue Men Group. I was nice. I like that bit.
So I think that is a great example. Like it took something that happened naturally and enhanced it and made it better.
Yeah.
The driver introductions being on a separate night, independent from the rest of it, and not really in the context of the rest of whatever else was going on, it was just like it was trying to make a moment that wasn't really a moment.
You know what we need with driver introductions? We need like a smoke machine coming out of like on one of the straights, and then they just call the drivers through one by one, and they come through in their cars and do like a donut or something, and then keep going.
Yes.
So like instead of just sitting on a podium waving, like no, go out there and spin around and see if you smack a wall. Like
we see it at the end of every season in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
We just need to take that spirit, that emotion, that passion that goes into that and put it into something else. Because the car is not the star, but it's what makes the race.
Yeah, it's one of those things of like the driver and the car and the driver. Like it'd be cool to see them both as like a, an introduction sort of thing. It's like, yeah. So that'd be how I would fix that. But anyway, let's continue on with the many opinions of Max Verstappen.
Yes.
Do you like the track? No.
We should revisit that question after yesterday, but I think it still holds true that I don't think he's telling porcupines.
Yeah, I liked. And then moving on, after all the FP1 and FP2 problems, he had the great quote of, "If I were a fan, I would tear the whole place down. That can't be right." So, yeah.
Here's the question, though: if the fans had in fact revolted, which I would understand, I may not agree with, but I would understand, would Max get incited for starting violence?
Based on current precedent in America, I would say not yet.
Okay.
We'll see how the courts play out.
Okay. It's okay to riot after a sports event, is what we're really saying.
Okay. No, I would say Yeah, I don't think he was purely inciting a riot, but he was
No.
just like, man, this isn't right.
No, and it was good for him to call that out. I thought that was appropriate.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as much as you may or may not like Max Verstappen, I think he is doing a good job as kind of a Formula One mouthpiece, being a current driver's champion. I think he's doing a good job at that. And speaking of which, there was a great blurb from one of the press conferences. I think it was post-quali. Where Max went on about a 2-minute thing about like what the emotion behind Formula One and what he likes. You think it was a little bit of gatekeeping. Just to sum up before we get into it, his kind of thing was like he wants people to understand like what they're doing at the track. He understands it's an entertainment product, but he feels like the Las Vegas Grand Prix, at least before qualifying, was much more shifted to like the entertainment focus than like the actual racing performances, where he felt like Formula One was the sideshow rather than the main event. And he prefers racing on purpose-built tracks as opposed to street tracks, which I don't blame him for. I think overall it was a good statement. Do you think there was a little bit of gatekeeping in there?
It was the way he said. There was a lot of like, if you're an F1 fan, you really understand this, and we want to put it on for the fans and the current fans. And it felt a lot like, if you don't love F1 for what F1 is, I don't have time for you. When you read between the lines, and like all that he said, I agree with the sentiment, but there was just something that came out in the way that he said it, because this is the challenge when you talk about gatekeeping. It is very easy for you to be like, well, serious fan this, you got to do this, you got to be able. Some people, to get into that, you have to pass through this experience, and it felt very much, if I saw that out of context and I didn't know Max and I didn't know a bunch of the other stuff, it would feel a lot like, if you're only here because you've just come for the entertainment, I don't want you here, right? Which is like, I'm keeping you outside the gate. And I feel the thing that's interesting about Vegas, which I still, to my point earlier, they turned it up to 12 and it should be 11, is it is the gateway to enjoying the sport more, right? It is the way to pull people in, and that's what got me about it. Is I'm like, I think they got a lot wrong, but there's a certain truth in what they're trying to do with the Las Vegas Grand Prix, or at least I think FOM is trying to do with the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And there was just a hint in his voice and the way, the specific words he chose in a couple of places, that was a lot like, if you don't really like F1, I don't want you here.
Yeah, I took a little something different away from it. I didn't see the gatekeeping as much, because to me, I thought he was saying more along the lines of like, he understands that like entertainment can be a way to get people in the door to a racing event. And I think his critique was more of, he doesn't feel like tracks like this give him the ability to show, or give the drivers the ability to show off their talents in such a way to get people to be more of a fan of Formula One than just coming to see like a DJ or something like that. It's kind of like how I was reading it. So I felt like he was saying that this is actually doing a disservice to trying to get more people into the sport, because they don't get to truly see what we are capable of.
I think there's also the aspect that, maybe as I read it, there's a lot of, Max can be very blunt, and I feel this is actually in some respects a very delicate topic, and bluntness kind of got overshadowed the point he was trying to make.
I think overall, I'd say 95% of what he was saying, like, very much on point and everything like that. There may be some minor gatekeeping there, but yeah. So then we move on to the race. We'll talk more about everything, but Max did end up getting a 5-second penalty and had the great radio message of, "That's fine, send them my regards," referring to the stewards.
Very similar to what he said when they weren't going to allow cars to unlap in Abu Dhabi 2021.
Yeah. Do you think George ever sends his regards to the stewards?
No, because he doesn't care.
That's true. And then finally, on the many opinions of Max Verstappen, he really enjoyed the race. He thought it was great racing, a lot of fun, and can't wait to be back next year. So, yeah.
Did you see the actual interview after the race, the pre-podium interview?
I did not, but I just realized I forgot another opinion of Max Verstappen, which is one of the things he loved most about this race was his hotel room.
Oh, interesting. I missed that one.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about the post-race thing, but there was David Coulthard was trying very, very hard to get Max to walk back his "I don't really like Las Vegas for a race" statements, and Max, because he's a smart cookie, was not willing to do that. But he did play the political game. Like, he very carefully couched it as, "I had an enjoyable race, and I'm looking forward to trying again next year." It was not a full blanket statement, so credit to Max for sticking to his guns there.
Yeah. Cool. Quali, do you want to talk any about Quali? I kind of don't.
I don't really, but I was thinking about one thing about this morning. I made the statement yesterday, and I still mostly believe it to be true, that quali was really boring and there was nothing that was very interesting that happened. But in hindsight, having seen the race performance relative to the quali performance, I did not think at the time that the quali was a random number generated because of an evolving track. In hindsight, I was wrong, and I think the evolving track played a bigger role than I think it appeared to at first, because it wasn't the traditional rapid evolution. It was much more subtle.
Yeah, and there was a lot of cars that ended up out of position. I put Yuki last, but that looked to be about where the pace of the Alpha Tauris were this week.
Yeah.
The McLarens were straight to the back. They were both out in Q1. Lewis and Checo both missed Q3. Both the Williams were in Q3.
And that is the indicator for me that there was a track evolution that happened and people didn't time it right, and it was not quite the normal track evolution.
Right, and the one thing I think we should mention, back on like Carlos Sainz in the free practice, was like he got a 10-place grid penalty for all the new parts he had to take, and the note from the stewards was like, we don't want to give you this penalty, but we have to give you this penalty. And that was a bit of a shame, because and I know you and I talked a little bit during the week about like, oh, it would be great if there could be like, if there is a failure of the circuit, like this won't count against you. And I think that needs to be something that F1 needs to look at, because we've had a couple occasions of cars being damaged by drain grates coming up on certain tracks. It's not an isolated incident. I think they need to look at, especially in the cost cap era, of like, because you got to think Ferrari and Mercedes, we're definitely going to talk about it, are coming like right down to the wire for P2 and the constructors. And if they're spending all the way to the cost cap, this is $1.5 million they could not afford.
Yeah, it was a lot of money, and like because I think that's the second part of it, is right. I think it is absolutely morally correct that he should not have taken a 10-second grid penalty, but I also think that in the case of when you think about this as a business, you absolutely should not charge your contractor $1.5 million for something that you screwed up. And I feel that is, it's like, from a business perspective, which may be the way that this really gets shaken out rather than a sporting perspective, it was ridiculous.
I would love for Ferrari to overspend $1.5 million on the cost cap and then litigate it that way. Because we know from Red Bull that that's just a minor sporting penalty. And the worst case is they lose like some of their aero testing and CFD time, which that's not where Ferrari's lacking. Honestly, if they lost 50% of their strategy time, maybe they could actually do better.
Now there's an idea.
So we're going to give you 150% of your strategist time. That is your penalty for Ferrari. Yeah, so I think that was kind of crap to see Carlos put in such a good performance in qualifying and then be straight back to like 12th.
Do you lend credence to the suggested live broadcast commentary that it was Mercedes who put the kibosh on it? I don't, because I don't think the regulation allowed it.
No, and the stewards came out and said, like, we don't want to do it, but the rules say we have to.
I do think that's a great example of if they add a force majeure / other clause, you can't let the teams vote on it in the moment.
Plus, didn't they remove the unanimous thing? It's only like down to 75% now, so like you couldn't have one team block it.
I think that's for changing rules, and I don't.
Okay.
And so
well, technically, this would be a changing of the rules.
True. But like a permanent change to the rule rather than exceptions to the rules, and so I don't know. But I think if you allowed the teams to vote in situations like this, it would end up in a total train wreck.
Yeah, I agree. There's too much conflict of interest in there.
Yes.
Yeah. I do think, however, because we really haven't talked about it, and the rule's gone away for a while, this was a great circumstance of, because the Q2 tire rule is gone, we were still able to see Sainz put in good quali laps, because there was no reason to not go to Q3. Because when you had the Q2 tire rule, when you'd then start on the back of the grid with a used set of tires.
Yes.
Versus, okay, well, I'm already going to be at the back of the grid. I might as well just, phone in qualifying and, get. So I think this was great to actually see, like, this was a great example of that tire, that rule going away is good.
Yeah, let drivers actually try and qualify because it made sense for them.
All right, the race.
The race.
Well, technically, the pre-race. The parade.
The pre-race. We need to start with very important information that is unclear, and there is a conflicting information from interested parties. Apparently, as you alluded to earlier, a car decided to emit a certain amount of oil all over Max Verstappen's grid stop.
A classic American car.
Indeed, which seems absolutely on brand for a giant hot rod. The interesting thing was I was watching the F1 TV's pre-race broadcast, and it had an interview with Horner, who instantly blamed Lewis's car for dropping on Max Verstappen, and then called Lewis Hamilton an old-timer just like his car. Which I thought was unfair and interesting, which then minutes...
I mean, isn't Lewis the second oldest person on the grid?
Would you use the term old-timer?
In a sporting context, yes.
Okay. In the context of way Horner said it, it was not meant in that way. It was definitely meant to denigrate him. But most importantly, it's not just the statements that Horner made, but Martin Brundle later in the broadcast, shortly after the first lap, said it was Oscar Piastri's car that decided to pee oil all over the floor, which leads to the great question of who was right, and is Horner actually just making stuff up for the proverbial poop and giggles?
I mean, everything could be true. And also,
Indeed.
It could have been more than one of those old cars.
It absolutely could have been more than one car. Anyway.
Man, that was a really crowded grid.
So it's the first time I've watched a grid walk for a very long time, and I didn't think it seemed that busy until they got to the very end, the top three.
Yeah, so I was watching Martin Brundle's grid walk because I'm like, oh, this could be an absolute show. I want to make sure I see this, and it actually wasn't. It was actually pretty well behaved. I was all ready for all sorts of the influencer sort of stuff we've seen in Miami, but no, there was a lot more people in Vegas that were kind of more normal or some sort of F1 fans. With the exception of the Dutch guy, everybody supported Lewis Hamilton. Yeah.
What's that bit?
There was a Dutch, somebody who was some professional or some famous person who was Dutch who was on the grid, and they obviously supported Max Verstappen because they're Dutch. Everybody else,
supported the GOAT.
Supported Lewis Hamilton. Yeah.
There was something, as you said, as you were talking about the Miami contrast, it did occur to me that actually it feels like the people who showed up to the F1 grid, and I think this is leading into your point, there was a lot of what I would call business people, rich people, right? Not famous people, they were there, but really it was rich people. And I feel like Miami was more famous people who came out and did the thing, whether by intent or by accident. But that was that split between those two.
Yeah. I think Will.i.am has become quite a Formula One fan, which is pretty cool to see. So apparently he'll be in Abu Dhabi next week as well, or 2 weeks. So that'll be fun.
Quite the jet setter.
Yeah. And then I feel like I have to mention it because the first 5 laps were just so crazy. There is, if you notice, there were Las Vegas Grand Prix letter jackets that so many people were wearing.
What is a letter jacket?
Oh man, it's like so they're very popular with high schoolers because generally your high school gives them to you of I go to this high school and I played this sport or I did this artsy thing. So at my high school, you could letter in band, you could letter in choir, you could letter in football, you could letter in track, you could letter in swimming, and then
And so what's the letter? How does that play into it? Does it mean you got a letter on your back saying your name and whatever?
Well, the letter I have would be on my chest, but so essentially the high school I went to, it would be the first letter of that high school, and that's the letterman's jacket.
This is the
so you earn the letter.
If you watch something from the 50s, you've got the.
Would you like me to go get my letter jacket and I can put it on for the rest of the podcast?
If that would entertain you, yes.
I mean, it would only be for you because we don't do a video version of this podcast.
I can describe the excitement that I hear as you show me your amazing jacket.
Please stand by. All right.
For our listeners, this isn't just... I actually, for our viewers, in hindsight, I understand why this is called a letter jacket.
Yeah, because it's got a big letter on it.
It should be called a letters jacket. There are letters.
No, there's just the one.
But there's numbers, and there's another letter on the other side, and then there's a whole other thing in the middle, and it's I feel like I've been cast back to a 1980s film which goes back in time to the 1950s. This is ridiculous.
So Back to the Future?
It's Back to the Future, no comments. But it's like mods versus rockers, right? Except it's not mods. It's the squares, and it's that's what they would wear. It's amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, so there were a lot of letter jackets, Las Vegas letter jackets, and there's been this thing recently where some pro sports team have showed up to a big game wearing some sort of letter jacket or something, and then it's gone horribly wrong for that team. And There's kind of
like when Mercedes in Austria decided to go for like their equivalent of a letter jacket with lederhosen.
Yes, exactly. So like the kind of, it's a very like high school thing, even like a college thing in some sense. So like the idea of trying to bring it to like professional sports is it like always ends terribly. And I saw this going like, oh no, they have letter jackets out. It's going to be a shit show. And my wife was watching the race with me, and she was like, how many crashes do you think they're going to be? And it's like, I said 2 safety cars, and I was off by 1 because there were technically 3 safety cars with the virtual safety car at the start. So I saw those letter jackets. I'm like, oh no, we've entered the curse.
Some would argue that the curse followed through, causing all the crashes. But this is F1. That's not how it works. The universe hasn't watched enough Drive to Survive to work out what makes it great.
That's true. Anyway, moving on to the start.
Yes.
Max got his elbows out and I think kind of outbraked himself and pushed everybody off. And then Sainz and Alonso did some wonderful spinning pirouettes and put themselves on the optimal strategy.
You know, I was expecting a lot worse, but I was not expecting what happened. And I wish I had the raw data from the steering angle and the braking, because I'm not sure Max did that on purpose and was necessarily worthy of a 5-second penalty. It looked like he genuinely screwed it up and was like, I'm going nowhere. And he only through his skill did he not career into Charles Leclerc.
I was a big fan of Max getting the 5-second penalty, not because necessarily I thought he did anything wrong, because I think it was a little bit on the wrong side, but kind of like turn 1, lap 1 sort of stuff.
Exactly.
So they've let some of that stuff go in the past. But Max has been doing such a good job this season. It's such a dominant season that I wanted a little wrinkle in the plans of just let's see what adversity Max can overcome. And so I was like, give him the 5-second. Let's see what he can do.
Yes. And he did great. The thing that I thought that was funny about Alonso, because we're going to talk a lot about Max in this one, because I think Max was the savior of this race. As always, I thought Alonso was just like he had zero grip. Like it was Turkey 2020 all over again, and that thing was pirouetting and spinning around and then getting into bumper cars. It was ridiculous.
Speaking back to like the quality of the track rubbering in, I think it definitely, like, you could see it rubber in throughout the race. And I think those first laps were so treacherous. Brundle at one point said, towards the end of the race, it's like, this has been like watching an Inters race, like a wet weather Inters race, because the track was so cold. Normally they're dealing with track temperatures in the 40 or 50 degrees Celsius, and this one was 18 degrees Celsius, same as the air temperature. So it wasn't as cold as we initially thought it was going to be, but Vegas can actually get cold and wet in November. So if we're on a 10-year deal, we could have a really bad weekend at Vegas as far as weather goes.
Can you imagine it being cold and raining? That would be...
Dominic, I live in Seattle. Yes, I can.
Obviously, you can imagine the experience, but with the impact that it would have on the race, it would be Turkey 2020 again, I think.
It would be.
That intermediate commentary about the tires, I think actually bore true in the same way that Turkey had that slick to mediate problem, where it's like the tires came in and they kind of did this weird thing that maybe wasn't really expected. I think there was a certain element, not to the same extreme, that was going on with the track yesterday.
Yeah, and it was also, I think, a weird track as far as tires concerned, because like the straights were so long that they cooled off that like if you push any tire too hard, it would grain up in the corners and then be useless like very quickly. And I think that's kind of what we saw with Max, because he tried to do his Max goes away into the distance thing, and he burned through those mediums real quick.
Yeah, you could see it. Which is rare to see. Max's tires are like usually beautiful, smooth, perfection of amazingness, but no, they had like giant lines down them, and it's like, it's not good.
No, and then shortly after that virtual safety car ended, and they cleaned up all the carnage from turn 1, Lando had an amazing crash.
When they first showed that, I thought that was it was a bad crash, but I thought it was like a properly bad crash. Like I was like, because they cut away immediately. They were like, oh, he hit something bad. And he did, but not as bad as the pictures would have otherwise alluded to.
No, it was the longest crash of the season, that's for certain.
Yeah, when I first saw what the crash had happened, I thought he had outbraked himself and just gone straight into that barrier. But it was like the corner before, and he just went in backwards, and it spun to the right direction right as he hit the wall at the very end of the what do you call it? The exit road? No.
The escape road?
The escape road, that's the one I'm looking for.
Anyway, yeah, and there's been some onboard footage of him. He was like really shaking, I think, of some of his adrenaline after the crash. He ended up going to the hospital for observation, was released. Everything is fine with Lando. But man, that was a long crash.
Yeah. in his post race, post hospital interview, he said that he believed there was a bump, and that his team and some commentators have subsequently said that the bump plus the cold tires after the VSC just threw him for a loop. And if you watched a lot of the other cars they would go through with Sparks, and he was maybe just 1 inch in the wrong direction, that it just dunk and kicked him off and threw him off. And so I think that was an unexpected bump, and I was surprising in hindsight that nobody else did it.
Yeah. And that safety car brought in a lot of people to change their tires.
Most everybody, right?
No, because Max did it was like lap 4 or 5. That was where we had Checo changed his tires and all, and
he had a new front wing.
Yeah. Or did they change? No, they changed another VSC. Either way, we had a lot of people who were suddenly on a weird strategy right from the start. Definitely a 2-stop. And I was just thinking a little bit of, could this all be Fernando Alonso's doing? Because we were on a brand new street circuit at night. There's been an early crash. He's now on a strategy that doesn't look good. This all felt a little too familiar.
They would never do that again.
No.
I have no idea what you're talking about. There's no correlation to anything that have happened in the past.
If you have no idea what we're talking about, please go look up Singapore 2008 and Crashgate. Anyway, and then finally some actual racing happened.
Yes.
And it was racy. We had Charles coming back at Max and overtaking Max as he went into the pits to put on some hard tires. They then left Charles out for a long time. Max ended up serving his 5-second penalty. George overtook him because of the 5-second penalty. And then we got a good George on Max fight, which was very fun.
Was it a fight?
Well, it was fright for George.
Yes, it was definitely a fright. I'm not sure I'd call it a fight.
And that leads one thing that I want to talk about from the top of the show is, did Max learn all of his overtaking spots from the Formula One game?
That's a great question. He's apparently spent a lot of time in the sim last week in Milton Keynes, but maybe he's been playing this on his plane back and forth.
Well, he did say sometime last week or something, if he's tried the Vegas track, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I tried it on the F1 game. I hit every single wall." Which, hey Max, I feel it there, bud.
That worked for him in Monaco.
It did. But like, just going into that, I feel like that there were a lot of people who were using the DRS zones, especially for overtaking. Especially coming down the strip was a very big one. Maybe a little too powerful in hindsight, but very good. I don't know if it was too powerful, or it's just, some of the cars were just on such older rubber comparatively that it just looked very overpowered. But that spot where Max overtook George was I don't think a planned overtaking spot.
No, I don't think that was designed to do that. I think,
or at least early in the race it wasn't, because I think that's also where Charles got past Checo on the last lap as well.
Yes, I feel that is a great example of the tires and the track giving you just that a modicum more grip, and suddenly the whole dynamic changes. And I think that's what likely happened in that situation, especially after Lewis took out the bollard.
Yeah, that made it a whole lot easier because then you didn't hit the bollard.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I thought, and then George got a 5-second for his unawareness of where Max was.
The direct quote is that Russell did not see Verstappen, and I wasn't fighting him. I hate to say this, George, but you had track position. Why weren't you fighting him? I mean, I know it's Max, and I get it, but like, how did you... Actually, now as I'm seeing, there is logical inconsistency. If he wasn't fighting Max, right, that implies that he knew that Max was there, but yet he says he didn't see Max and turned in on him. So...
Or if he wasn't fighting Max, why didn't he just let Max turn through?
Indeed.
George, you got to be consistent. Actually, George is never consistent.
Exactly.
Actually, no, George is perfectly consistent. George is always the best.
Exactly. I would like to return to a small comment that you made about DRS, because I think the DRS was really interesting here compared to a lot of the tracks. There was that aspect of whack the DRS button, overtake someone, and isn't it great? But there was also, in the strangest way, and maybe it was just positioned just right, there was a lot of, I can't quite get past you, but I can definitely stay with you in a good way. Like, there were lots of people who were able to leverage that DRS behind someone to really stay in touch. You saw it all the way down the field, and not in a DRS-y trainee type of way.
Yeah, this definitely felt like this is the race that proved what DRS was all about.
Yes.
Of like, well, to make up for the dirty air in the corners, you get an extra boost on the straights. And it really did feel like, this is why we have DRS.
Yes, it was pretty good. I saw someone make the statement. I didn't realize this is the second fastest track after Monza.
Oh, that means that means Jeddah is no longer the fastest street circuit. The Saudis are going to be upset.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so then the collision with George and Max triggered another safety car, because there was Red Bull front wing all over the track. So do you think that Ferrari hung Charles out to dry by not pitting him for another set of tires?
Yes.
Okay. No discussion on that point. Just Ferrari strategy is going to Ferrari.
Ferrari going to Ferrari. Ferrari is especially going to Ferrari when it's Charles out front.
Yeah, well, that put Max and Sergio on fresh rubber, because Checo also pitted, and hunting down Charles for the win. And then what we got Perez to overtake Charles, and then Charles overtook Perez, and then Max passes them both and just goes away. And there was a really interesting comment that apparently Max lowered his rear wing prior to qualifying, and Sergio decided to stay with the thicker rear wing, which meant that he had better tire warm up after the safety car, but then was a sitting duck to, well, Max and Charles, as we saw.
Yeah, I think that's another great example of people making the poor choice and not listening to their strategist, aka I've forgotten the lady's name again.
Hannah Schmidt.
Hannah, that's it. Hannah Schmidt, who's like, you should probably just realize that this car goes like a rocket ship and you don't need to qualify. You just need to be able to drive it quickly in the middle of the race. And Checo being like, yeah, but I've got to outsmart everybody who goes out in Q2. So,
yeah, I mean, if you're going to go out in Q2, that's the car to do it in.
I did have a thought this morning while I was preparing for this podcast. We don't allow active aero in F1.
Yet.
Fine, whatever. Yet. 2026.
2026.
But it did make me wonder whether there's any regulatory requirement, and I don't think there is, because Parc Fermé ends as soon as the green light goes out, that you can't change the wings and the proper, like the rear wing configuration once the race has started. Which leads me to the question of, maybe you don't have active aero, but you design your aero in such a way that just like the front wing can be adjusted with a bzz bzz of the drill, you should bzz bzz of your rear wing and suddenly fix all of those problems.
Sure.
I wonder if that's allowed. I mean, there's a weight trade-off, but I don't know. Interesting thought.
Yeah. The rear wing also is a little bit more complex with like the DRS flap and all than just like the...
Yeah, but nothing an engineer can't solve.
Cheaply.
Exactly.
So yeah. And then Max did his best to kind of help out Perez, try to stay ahead of Charles. Charles outbraked himself to get Perez back in front of him, and that was like, oh, this could be it. And then Charles closed him in, and there was the radio message of, hey, could you give Checo a tow to hold up from... to help out him against Charles. And to Max's credit, he really tried to help Checo hold on to that second place. And
which, it's Max, and he does not like Checo, right? He said before he wasn't going to help him in doing anything else, but here he was ready to do it. And arguably, sliding back into Checo puts you at risk from Charles. I mean, clearly Max knows that's not really a problem.
I think it's fine for last lap,
yes.
But like, because he was never going to let it get that close.
No.
But it was 4.5 seconds down to about 1.8 by the end of the race, I think, like that. It was tight. Or it was very clear he was trying his best to bring Sergio back into play. And Charles, what an amazing move there by Charles at the end. I think this race really proved how good Charles can drive a car for like 2 or 3 laps. Because he had 2 or 3 really good laps before he just didn't really have the pace to fight anymore. And then at the end, he had the 2 or 3 good laps to bring Checo back into play and get P2. Beautiful. Yeah.
It was beautiful. It is also the second race in a row where Sergio Perez got whooped on the second to last corner. It was brilliant. I am not one to scream at an F1 race. I don't really let that out, but I did last night. I was screaming at the TV as Charles pulled off. It was amazing. It was fantastic. It was perfect in so many ways. It fits the narratives that I want to be told. It was just a moment. And unless something happens next week, it's going to be a tough call between that and Fernando Alonso as being the best moments of the season.
And then did you doubly scream as well when George's 5-second time penalty slotted him just behind Lewis Hamilton?
I'm not sure I screamed, but I was like definitely chuckled and smiled a little bit because that's what I care about.
That one made me chuckle as well. Yeah, and that was the race.
Yeah, you have it here, but was this Max's best win of the season? I don't know if it was his best win, but it was a great race to make the statement that it's not just the car.
I think it was his best win of the season. Because so we've seen Max have to do some recovery drives or driving for more of the field from either, Charles crashing in Miami during qualifying or, screwing up. They screwed up Jeddah, I think, and Max was in Q2. So Max has had some drives from further down the grid.
Yes.
But he never seemed bothered by them. It was just like, oh, and you're gone. Oh, and you're gone. Oh, and you're gone. Like on a chat with some friends of this between podcasts, I had calculated, or there was a thing about, I'm trying to pull up the stat real quick, about like how Max has had another race with no overtakes. How can he be considered the GOAT when he has no overtakes?
Mm-hmm.
Max prior to Vegas, I guess Vegas is just +1 on this, and I suddenly can't find the stat. Oh yeah, here we go. So Max is +41 this year on positions gained during races. 5 of those were for a gearbox penalty, and 13 was Saudi. So now I guess with Vegas, he's +42 on the season. Yeah, that, and here's the crazy bit in all that, which I mean, I guess if you think of the season, it's not that crazy. He's never had a negative number race. He has it's either 0 or positive. So he's never gone backwards from his grid position. This was the first race where he did something uncharacteristic of Max, which is blew up the tires in the first stint. Normally, he has been very good on his tires and ekes things out longer than ever. He kind of reverted to a little bit of Max of old on lap 1, turn 1, and got himself a 5-second penalty, which I do think was deserved. I wasn't broken up about it. And then in his, I think, a pretty good overtake of George Russell did George Russell things and took off his end plate. And Martin Brundle had two great comments during the race of there's nothing on an F1 car that is cosmetic. And then at the end of the race, maybe they should just lop those end plates off, because he was pumping in fastest lap after fastest lap, missing half that end plate. And I'm sure some of that goes down to, hey, they built a really good car. So, missing this one fin isn't the worst thing in the world.
The same happened to Charles Leclerc when he lost a end plate earlier in the season.
Yeah, but it was just, for me, it was, this is the only race of the season I can think of where he's really had to try to overcome some adversity, because he was not pulling through the field very quickly after that pit stop and after serving the 5-second penalty. And because that in a sense put him out of some sync with some drivers who, normally Red Bull does a Red Bull stop and everything, and you're still in front of, say, George Russell. So I think this was his best drive of the year, just purely based on what it took for him to win. And then at the end of the race, pulling out like a almost 5-second gap that, let's say for some reason the stewards decided Max was at fault for throwing that lunge in, he still would have won the race, because he could have probably pulled out another half second over Perez if needed.
Yep.
So yeah, I think overall it was, I think, his best drive of the season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with his best drive. I'm not sure whether it's his best win, but I'm never sure about a win being a best one, if that makes any sense. I think like a good example at the 2021, Lewis's win at Brazil was his best win of the season, just because of all of that adversity. I'm not sure that necessarily holds true this year, but I think I need to review all of Max's wins. Maybe they're just so not unrememberable that actually that makes a statement that this one is the best win. I
mean, you could argue a Grand Slam would be the best win. But like, I'd say the most interesting of his wins. How about that?
I will go with that.
Okay.
So that's the race. Should we talk a little bit about the bit between the finishing of the race and the podium interviews before I gave up and went to bed?
Sure.
So we had no cool down room, but we did have carpool karaoke in a a proper Rolls Royce, the one with the sparkles in the roof and the suicide doors.
I have to say, I thought there'd be more space in the back seat looking at the pictures.
Yes, it is kind of surprising. And I thought it was the longest Max podcast we've had this season. It was ridiculous. The bit that I didn't watch, that I still think is absolutely insane. Not only did they drive from the pit lane to the Bellagio, they then drove back from the Bellagio to the pit lane to do the actual podium ceremony. And I'm sorry, there is a better way to solve this problem, and it does not require you to drive a Rolls Royce all the way down the strip to the Bellagio to talk to people for like 2 minutes and then send them back the other way again.
Is it Elon Musk's Tesla loop?
No, that is not the solution to this problem. The solution to this problem is have them get out of the car and then just do it, and then we're done.
Or they get out of the car at the Bellagio. Think of how great that would look with the fountains and all. Of course, I think the fountains are turned off because of the Vegas Grand Prix.
No, they did them.
Great. They did them? Great.
They did them immediately after the podium interviews, before the actual podium. They went with the whole F1 theme and everything.
They should have parked the cars up right in front of the fountains. It would have been great.
Exactly. And Mexico has this. it's not like it's that far to learn from. That just was strange. And my final comment on carpool karaoke / Rolls-Royce Uber drivers is that Perez looked like the absolute third wheel. He kept having to butt into the conversation to try and get them to listen to him. And even when he did, Max and Charles just turned back to each other and kept talking about the race and the strategy. And that moment when Charles finally learned that everybody else had actually stopped under the safety car and he hadn't, and Charles just died inside again. You'd have thought he'd have learned this by now. But yeah, Checo. Nobody likes Checo.
Yeah. I do have to say, I saw a bit of the post-race interview this morning with Max and Charles. They don't seem too broken up about the lap 1 turn 1 incident. Just an incident. Apparently, they've had tougher debriefs with each other when they were karting together. So,
yes,
yeah,
that was it was pretty good. Everybody was very nice except Checo because nobody likes Checo.
Did you want to talk anything about the interviews? And we already talked a little bit about DC trying to get Max to say something nice.
Yeah, no, I think we can skip all that.
Ferrari got Ferrari'd. Piastri wishes the tire compound rule didn't exist. Well, yeah, because you ran hard. Like,
it was such an interesting statement that he said it, and I'm like, dude, like the whole reason F1 kind of really works is because they added the compound rule. I know it's a bit ridiculous and it kind of puts the thumb on the scale. But having recently watched a bunch of 70s and 80s, people just no stop, and it's just ridiculous, and it just makes the race pretty boring. So,
I think you need to go one further, and you need to run every compound during the race.
I would also support that.
Yeah, that would be good. George Russell didn't see Max. We talked about that. Hamilton thinks he could have on the podium if it wasn't for his 2 crashes. We didn't talk a lot about Hamilton, and he had a
whoopsie of a race, but surprisingly for Lewis, it didn't get to him, and he just put his foot down and kept driving. I was like, great, this is all we need to see. He was driving, he did overtakes, he lunged down the inside, he pulled it all off. It was great. I think the only mistake he made, except he drove into Piastri, and that was kind of unfair.
Yeah, I think if I could sum up Lewis Hamilton's race in one word, it would be adversity.
Yes. But good for Lewis. I'm not sure he'd have been on the podium, though.
He also had Lando's car go all over the place in front of him.
Oh, was he the one right behind Lando watching it go? Oh, yeah, I remember that now. And he's like, is everything okay? And what about my front wing?
So I guess to sum up the race and the whole weekend, was the Las Vegas Grand Prix worth it?
Was it worth it for FOM? Probably. I think you probably got some nice TV coverage. Was it worth it if you dropped 15 grand? I don't think so. I think the fan experience was not great and the time of day was wrong, etc., etc., etc.
There were some terrible pictures of, like, I paid $5,000 for these seats and all I have in front of me is, like, a gantry.
Yes, it was not good. They need to do better on that, and I think they need to walk back the attempt to funnel everybody into buying a ticket.
I think they need to go visit the Singapore Grand Prix and see how they put up the lights and gantries and stuff in such a way that the track is lit and you're not obscuring the views.
Yes.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I don't know how to feel about this race because on the one hand, the race was actually a really good race.
It was. It was a really fun motor race.
It will be interesting to see that because was it a really fun race because the track was so green? Will it be so green in the future? Was it a really fun race because there was no running in FP1 and FP2, there was no data for the teams to go off of? Or was this always going to be how it played out because of the track rubbering in or not? Was it a good race just because of like the quality and being out of position? Was it a good race because Max got a 5-second penalty? I don't know what necessarily made this a good race, and we'll see if it's repeatable in the future.
That is a great question, and they kind of get the success of this race gives them an opportunity to try again next year.
Yeah.
Like, I know they have another opportunity to try again next year, but this almost gives them the free pass to go and have a better run at it.
Yeah, and I think kind of the question, at least going into the race, and I still feel some of it a little bit, of if you are an F1 fan, are you buying a ticket to this race next year? Because, like, after most of the stuff and the time of day, and granted it is Las Vegas, so you want to talk about New York being the city that never sleeps. Vegas knows what's up. Like, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I was kind of joking with Liz the other day that you and I are going to go to the race next year because the tickets are going to be like $5 because nobody wants to go. And airfare is always cheap to Vegas.
And now they've ruined it by having a reasonable race.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it was a reasonable race for the in-fan experience.
It is whether they can parlay the performance, the on-track performance, into the on-stand performance.
Yep, and we'll see if they can do that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Do we have any takes or rumors?
I would like one last comment on Las Vegas. Next season, it is a triple header: Qatar, at Las Vegas and Abu Dhabi in a 3-week period, and with the time of the race, it's going to be ridiculous. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I'm glad that F1 has really capitalized on we are going to put the races in a sane order to be more carbon friendly.
Perfect. Sustainable. Sustainable along many axes, and by sustainable we mean not. Anyway, spicy takes and rumors. My spicy take...
Sustainable on how much money we can bring in.
My spicy take is that no one likes Perez. Just after seeing him in the car, like, nobody likes Perez. Nobody cares about him.
So Perez is, I think, a really interesting double-edged sword right now, because I think we said we were going to revisit, does Perez still have a job, like, later on? Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, he has secured P2 in the driver's standings. It is the first time Red Bull have ever had a 1-2 in the driver's standings.
Shocking.
However, when you are overtaken on the last lap 2 weeks in a row, that's not a good look.
It's not a good look at all.
For a car that the other driver has been running off into the distance every other race this season.
Yes. Not good look.
It's not a good look.
My second spicy take and rumor. Oh, spicy take, not really a rumor. I think the last race of the season should be a sprint race. Bear with me, because I don't like them. But where it is all rookies and no current F1 drivers, and the points do count to the World Constructors' Championship. Like they have the whole you must take part in an FP1 rookie something. They should do that with the sprint race at the last race of the season. I think that would be a great way to make the actual last race of the season not a snooze fest.
Yeah. Well, I think like for like world drivers and stuff, like I think it's good if we have like the Grand Prix on Abu Dhabi. Like we do the whole Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, but then we get one extra special bonus round just for the constructors. And, you know, we'll do 10 cars on the grid. We'll give them like, you know, because you do the new driver test, right? Like right after Abu Dhabi. So then the next weekend, we'll just come back around and we'll do a 10-car sprint race. And those points go towards the Constructors' Championships.
I can get behind. I feel like you have to have it before the Grand Prix because everybody's done with the Grand Prix at that point.
Yeah.
From a TV entertainment perspective. Okay. Shall we wrap up and go for some crazy but plausible predictions for Abu Dhabi?
You think Logan's going to lose his seat?
I think he's finally going to lose his seat. I think they've been waiting to the end of the season because they didn't want to upset everybody.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's just a question of who are they going to replace him with? Because
that's what will save him.
That's always how you want your job to be saved. It's like, well, we can't find anybody else to do this, so we're just going to keep letting you do a mediocre job at this.
You're not as bad as Nicholas was. Second crazy prediction is I think Ferrari is going to rescue second in the Constructors because they are currently 4 points behind. They're on 388 yes. And Merc on 392.
Yes.
And I think that secretly Merc might relish this because of the aero time.
However, if Merc needs to finish P2 so that Toto can fetch top dollar to sell the team.
This is the quandary. This is the quandary. I think Toto does want to sell the team, but I think he wants to sell it after it's got the 9th championship with Lewis and they can both peace out at the same time. And so he's pinning his hopes on
the 9th. The Constructors, 9th Constructors.
The Constructors for the 9th and then 8th for Lewis. And I think then he wants to peace out at the end of like Lewis will pull a Nico Rosberg if we pull it off next year.
Sure. So you sent me something that was great of Toto being like, we think we can, stay with the Ferraris as long as it's a fair race direction.
As long as we have good race directors next weekend.
Yeah. If Toto does want to sell the team, I would say he actually doesn't want good race directors next weekend because he wants the car to be able to finish P2 in the Constructors on track and then something crazy happens. So they actually end up P3 in the Constructors. So they get the prestige of, we were really P2 on track, but we get all the aero time of P3.
Now there is a conspiracy theory I can subscribe to.
Right. So you think Ferrari's going to go over Merc. McLaren and Aston Martin are still pretty tight. They are 9 points between each other, with McLaren being on top. And I think because this race happens in the Middle East, where Aston Martin has been good all season, I would not be surprised if Aston Martin actually end up on top of McLaren in the constructor standings.
They bring a few extra octane from the local oil refinery.
Yes.
Okay. The only question here is Abu Dhabi a high-speed corner circuit?
They added one.
They did add one, but do they have... I don't think it is in general, which probably plays to Aston Martin over McLaren. Sector
3 is still terrible. Sector 1 is still pretty good. Sector 2 is okay. And Sector 3 is terrible.
So we'll see what happens. I think I would agree with you that Aston Martin's going to pull it off, and I'm going to blame it on Fernando Alonso.
Ooh. What if they're in position to pull it off, but somehow Stroll screws it up?
Oh, perfect. Yes,
That's
absolutely.
the prediction.
Boom.
They're in position to do it, and Lance is the problem. Well, if Lance wasn't such the problem all season, they would already have that position wrapped up over McLaren, the team that didn't show up till Silverstone.
They would be in second in the Constructors' Championship.
They would be. That's insane.
Shall we call it?
Oh, I think we've rambled on enough.
Okay. As always, we are waiting for your feedback, and you have one final opportunity before the end of the season to write into feedback@tinfoilhelmets and let us know about your conspiracies, your feedback, and your wants. Remember to tell your friends to like, listen, rate, and subscribe to the greatest F1 podcast that has ever come out of Seattle, Washington.
Oh, good. We put enough qualifiers on it.
Exactly. That's how you do it.
Yep. The greatest podcast that records on Sunday morning after the Grand Prix.